Recording in progress.
Mic check, mic check. There we go.
Nailed it.
Okay, we're going to get started here in just a moment. We'll let everyone find their seats. Yeah. Yeah. The ergonomics of this is a little weird.
Say what?
Look at the ergonomics of this. It's a little strange. Maybe I'll just hold it in my hand. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. It's really heartening to see such a huge community turnout. Can you hear me? How is that better? There we go. I'll get close. All right. I'm Scott Johnson. I'm director of the ADU Center, and we're a nonprofit that has partnered with Marin County and the cities of Marin to help homeowners figure out what to do about their ADU projects. And we've had great partners in Corte Madera and the County of Marin in putting on this event today and opening up their council chambers for us. It's been a tremendous amount of work to get this all together, and we are so happy to see you here. So thank you for joining us this morning. We have some great sessions this morning. We'll have our opener with Ryan O'Connell from How to ADU. If you haven't seen him online on YouTube, he has amazing information about ADUs. And then we will have 3 talks instead of 4 today. We will have Lindsay Moon will be talking about financing your ADU and options. Then we will have Carrie Shores-Diller, who is an architect of ADUs, talking about the design and important characteristics of designing an ADU. And then there'll be me giving you the riveting talk about the new laws in 2025. So make sure you've had coffee before you come to that session. And then at the end, we will wrap up. Mark Setterland, who's the building official of Novato, couldn't make it today. He's unfortunately sick. So we will have a roundtable with all of us, Ryan and the 3 speakers, taking your questions, talking about ADUs, and just trying to provide as much information as we can. So thank you all. Last message, if you are planning to go on the tour, please check in at the ADU Center table. It has the white tablecloth. We have wristbands for you so that you can go to the ADUs and enter easily. All right, with that, I think I'll hand it off to Ryan.
Hey guys. So I'm Ryan. Like you said, I do YouTube videos and other social media stuff about ADU. So every day is ADU fair for Ryan. If you want any of that information, you can find it all online at How to ADU. But the more important thing today is that you go out there and it's the most professional, predictable crop of ADU people that has ever existed, right? If we were having this talk 5 years ago, the room would be relatively empty. A lot of the cities would not be in attendance, and there'd be more questions than answers, right? And there's still a lot of unpredictable stuff, but you've never had a more experienced group of professionals who can help you through the process. And I don't just mean the booths. I've been talking to people all morning who are in the industry, whether they're builders or designers or retired and had a role in the industry, who are also just thinking about their own properties now. So I don't need to get you too geared up because you came out on a Saturday in the morning bright and early. You're already into this. But the most important thing today is to meet the people who you'll continue talking to over the next several months while you're stirring over this project and deciding whether it's right for you or taking one of the big steps and meeting milestones. With that, I think we could kick right off. Don't want to waste too much time. That'll give us more time for the Q&As at the end. If you do have any good questions while you're going, just write them down or store them so that we can bring them up. Because if you're wondering it, a lot of people are wondering it. And it's really helpful to voice it in front of everybody. Thank you all for coming. This is so exciting. Who's first? Is it Lindsay? Yeah. All right. Without further ado, one of the best finance specialists in the ADU space, Lindsay Moon, come on down.
Thank you, Ryan. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Okay. Hi, I'm Lindsay Moon. I'm with Pro Mortgage. I'm an independent mortgage broker, and we're going to get my slides up here in a minute, I think. And yeah, we're going to talk about financing an ADU. I'm just going to say I'm recovering from a fall, and I've got some broken ribs, so I'm going to try to talk as loudly as I can, but if there's anything that you guys aren't clear about, just come see me afterwards. Okay. Oh, no, thank you. Standing is good. Yes. So I came up with my own little acronym for ADUs: amazing, dependable, and uber cool. That's what I think of them. We're truly seeing ADUs increase home values anywhere from 18 to 35%, which is tremendous. I would say the lower end of that is more attached ADUs, garage conversions, room conversions. The freestanding ground up ADUs are on the higher end of that, are really increasing property values tremendously. And ADUs are truly a great way to help solve for our housing crises. They are, in people's backyards, and rather than creating more and more of a footprint, we call this term infill. There are so many spaces in people's backyards to create housing responsibly. And if you're in the beginning process of all of this, which it sounds like many of you are, what really it comes down to first and foremost is feasibility and conversation, which is why we're all here today. Figuring out what you are able to build and what you can build on your property, and getting, the wheels in motion. That's truly the first step. I have seen sometimes people advertising these buy your ADU for $60,000 on Amazon and get your kit delivered. You're still building a house from the ground up. Every trade is going into an ADU. There is no cheap date. So just be forewarned. If you think about it, if you got a package delivered from Amazon, it's going to be on a box in your driveway. So what about the foundation? Where does all of the infrastructure of the building go? Think about flushing a toilet. Think about all of these things that go into having a home. It goes into your ADU as well. I get the question asked, is now a good time? Interest rates are on the higher side. They're not, they're crimping people's style a little bit in terms of being able to qualify. My answer is absolutely. Things are only going to get more difficult and more complicated in terms of there's a lot of pent-up demand. There's a lot of pent-up demand for home improvements, for buying homes, and as interest rates drop, or if they do drop, it's going to be a free-for-all. There are going to be a lot of people getting off that fence. So I always tell people, if you can do it now, it's a really good time. And if it makes sense for you, it's always a good time. Oh, sorry. Let me go back. And further, it's going to be harder to maybe find tradespeople once everybody kind of gets off the fence and starts doing this. And your intention too is to refinance if you are getting financing, you would be looking at refinancing once you're done construction anyway, because your home value has now gone up, which can help with the interest rate in terms of the loan to value, the amount that you're borrowing versus the amount of your home's value. And hopefully we'll see a drop in interest rates as well. So anticipate that the financing you may be getting now, some people are biting off a higher interest rate and they're like, you know, feeling hesitant about it, it's not likely something that you're going to be keeping as a 30-year term. Likely you'll be refinancing that once you're done construction. A couple of other ADU notables. I do recommend using an ADU company. There's a lot that goes into having to do this. And unless you have a lot of free time on your hand and you know how to navigate the building departments and you're getting your plan set together, having an ADU company, such as one of the great companies we have here today, is can be a real relief and can be very helpful. Always have a contingency. Construction is not an exact science, and you want to make sure that you are not running out of funds. That's the last place you want to be, is I'm out of funds and my ADU is not built. That's not a fun place to be in. And, you know, no crystal ball when it comes to where things are going with with mortgages, of course, but the anticipation is that we will be seeing a drop in interest rates. They certainly have been dropping the past couple of months here. And just a note about an independent mortgage broker such as myself, we don't work for any one bank or lender. We are independent, not middlemen, but we partner on a wholesale level with pretty much all banks and lenders. So we're really looking at you holistically and organically and trying to find the best loan product for you. And there's a lot out there. The first thing that it comes down to, though, is if you do think that you might need financing, it's the same process as if you were going to be buying a home or refinancing. You want to get pre-approved. You want to have that peace of mind knowing that you will be able to get the financing once you're ready. So I am often working with people weeks, months, sometimes years in advance of them actually being ready to bite off the financing, just to make sure, hey, am I going to be able to get this? Will I be able to afford this? And then you've got that peace of mind to take the next step to start getting a plan set going. I'll jump into the different loan types here in 1 second, but just know that there are a lot of different types of loans out there. So if you just go to one bank or lender and they say no, another lender right down the street might say yes, and that can be of benefit as to why you work with an independent broker. But if you do decide to do it on your own, just know that not all banks and lenders have the same products. And that said, there are 7 different ways to potentially finance your ADU. We've got a regular old refinance, which is touching your primary mortgage. Of course, you can also now purchase a home and get the funds to build an ADU. I'll get into that too. There are second mortgage products, HELOCs or HELoans. These are for those that have maybe a low interest rate on their first mortgage, a 2 or 3%, and don't want to touch that, but want to access the equity in their home. There are also reverse and reverse second options. The reverse mortgages, I know there were, back in 70s and 80s, some really unsavory terms out there for these types of products. A lot has changed. These can be very helpful. I always suggest to people talking to their financial advisor or their CPA before they embark on this, but there are reverse mortgage options as well. Number 5 is an ARV HELOC. An ARV stands for after repair value. These are for those that do not have existing equity, but know that their home is going to be worth that much more upon completion. And you can pull out up to 95% of that as completed value. So for example, if your home is right now worth $1 million, you are putting on an ADU, your home is worth maybe 1.5 at completion, it's the 1.5 that you can pull out the cash from, up to 95% of that. So that can be super helpful. There are also construction loans. I try to shy away from those if I can because they can be expensive, but it is an option. And there are also personal loans. I have some people that our clients will call me and say, look, I've got my parents financing the ADU for me, but we're going to need financing once we're done it. So, you know, a personal loan temporarily and then doing financing once you're done is also an option. Getting into a little bit of the nitty gritty with a few of these different options, the refi or purchase. This is again for those that would be willing to touch their primary mortgage if you want to do a cash out refinance. So you would be, if you have a low interest rate, this is not for you. But there are also options too where you can purchase a home using a home style or reno choice, which is the loan product name, to buy the home and then build your ADU. So if you are maybe a family looking for a home and you're like, oh, I just can't find a home that is meeting my standards that comes with an ADU, you could consider a home that has maybe a large backyard and actually purchase that and build your ADU. With any of these refis or purchases, the refinance, you do get full use of the funds. If you're doing a purchase using home style or reno choice, that would be a construction loan where you don't get to use the funds as you want to. They go into an escrow account and are released as, upon milestones of completion. Sorry, these keep skipping. So you're kind of pegged between your general contractor and your lender in terms of, you know, making milestones of completion of construction, and then funds are released as you go. Second mortgages, these HELOCs and HELoans are based upon our prime rate. So do anticipate paying a little bit higher of an interest rate for a second mortgage. There's more risk, obviously, for the lender. You're maxing out more of your equity. So this rate is going to be a little bit higher than where traditional mortgages are. Traditional mortgages right now are hovering in roughly the low 6% range. These HELOCs and HELoans can be anywhere from high sixes to sometimes double digits, depending on things like your credit score and how much you're pulling out of your overall equity. A couple of nuances with these products. These HELOCs and HELoans are proprietary. So every bank and lender has a different set of products. HELOCs tend to be adjustable, but there are fixed rate options. HELoans are very much like a primary mortgage, where it is like a 30-year fixed type of product. And you have full autonomy with the funds, meaning you can use the funds however you need to, and to release them, they come into your bank account. And there are a few different ways to qualify for these products as well. There's the traditional conventional way where you're using your tax returns and your income documents to qualify, but we also have out-of-the-box ways to qualify for those that might be self-employed or just have a unique income stream. There are bank statement options. There are ratio loans, also called DSCR loans. These are for investment properties, where it's about the property's income generation rather than your income generation. The reverse and reverse seconds are for those that are 62 and above. Like I said before, a lot of stereotypes have been debunked from these products in the past, that a lot more safeguards are in place for homeowners. The monthly payment is accrued on the back end. So the loan and those payments are only paid off once you sell the home, exit the property. And the reverse second does allow you to keep your primary mortgage in place. So some folks may be able to, swing their primary mortgage. It's at a low interest rate, but may not be able to qualify conventionally for a second mortgage. So this could be a potential option. The ARV HELOC, as I mentioned, this is for those that don't have enough existing equity and will use the future value of your home. These products actually are available not just for ADUs, but for any and all home improvements. And it's based upon what you are doing to the home. So there will be an appraisal of future value based upon your plan set. So you will have to have a plan set for this type of product. It is based upon the project at hand. You do have to use a licensed GC for this. It's not a do-it-yourself type of project where your general contractors got to actually become approved by the lender. But it's a fabulous product for those that need to use that as completed value or after repair value. Let's see. Oh, and it also, this one turns into a regular line of credit once you're done the construction, which is very helpful. Construction loans, like I said, can be very expensive. I try to shy away from them because they're usually a temporary loan. They can be quite expensive. It usually comes with some points. And so but a construction loan, you can also use the as completed value. There are many, many different nuances with different construction loans. So yeah, I'm happy to give you more information, but I'm not going to do too much of a deep dive. But like I said, a lot of these construction loans are going to be a higher interest rate, more expensive, and if we can avoid them, I try to. And a little recap and review. One thing I tell people a lot is finishes are a big driver of the cost of construction. So really be wary of all the bells and whistles. The more pretty glass railings and windows and balconies and things like that, you're going to be adding to the construction cost. Think about things like an IKEA kitchen. It's simple, easy, really. Like as an example, this one ADU in the picture, that's a very expensive ADU. That's not your average ADU. That's going to be a big driver of your cost. Sorry, some pain here. Like I say, ADUs are a win-win-win because you're creating more housing, you're increasing your home value, and you're solving for an issue. I have a lot of clients that are wanting to live like more multi-generational living or solving for their having someone live with them to help them so that they can age in place. There's a lot of reasons why people are doing ADUs, but I'm only seeing benefits of it bringing people together and sharing community. We really got into this single family zoning after World War II. We've all got these kind of ticky-tacky boxes, and they really keep us isolated. And I think a lot of people are looking for more community and shared space and more of a co-housing type of scenario. And ADUs are a really great way to help bring people together and share spaces. And with that, I'm Lindsay Moon. I'm with Pro Mortgage. I'm also a former general contractor. I'm still a builder on the side. And if you come to my table, you can see I build with the prefabricated wall panel as well. I'm very, very passionate about solving for our housing issues. And I'm happy to speak with you about your scenario. And please reach out to me. Thanks very much. And now we have Carrie. Are you talking?
Yes, I am. Hi, everybody. I'm Carrie from Inspired ADUs. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to try to shove all you need to know about design and building in 30 minutes. So we'll see how we do about that. But I want to tell you a little bit. I'm an architect. We started doing ADUs in 2008. We were trying to figure out what our legacy was as an architecture firm, what would be meaningful. And these small backyard cottages were really exciting to us because they helped offer a diverse type of housing to help our cities grow differently, our economy be something that we could afford, and just that our housing needs to adapt a little bit more with us than it does right now. So we got very excited about this before the state laws eased up. And as the state laws have opened up, it's really become a big passion of mine. I started it off because I had really bad spinal problems for 10 years and I was fighting my house. I might be a little bit strong-willed. And instead of healing, I was really spending a lot of time arguing with my bathroom and trying to do things myself when I really couldn't. So I thought there had to be a more inspired way to design housing so that we could have independence and opportunities and options. And so that's what started us and really drove us to get going. So there's a lot of types of ADUs. Housing law is something that would change very, very, very slowly. That is not the case anymore. We are seeing an incredible surge in new housing laws to try to help people have new opportunity, add more housing. What we call the missing middle is where ADUs really come in. So you used to be able to look at a code and know it for 3 years. Like now it's like 3 months. So I do invite everyone, if you've talked to your planner recently, if you've talked to a company, there may be like 3 new laws that could affect your property and the potential opportunity of what you could develop. So constantly check in with YIMBY is a great website where they are constantly posting the latest laws. The governor will pass new laws every September, October. So right around now, we should see some more housing laws come into effect. And then it takes time for those to get into the local cities for people to understand them. So you need to check in on this regularly or make sure that your team is pretty up to date. YIMBY.org, it stands for Yes in My Backyard as a counter to the NIMBYs. So YIMBY.org. And they are really like a nonprofit that is on top of housing laws, and they give really good diagrams and explanations. So they help demystify it. So I would recommend that. So detached ADUs are what we all think of, the cute little cottage in the backyard. We'll talk about this more for hillsides. Those are great, but in some of your properties might be a little complicated to achieve. Attached are really wonderful. If you have an attic or a basement that has enough space, those can be a very affordable way to do it. If you have an attic or a basement that's not quite the right height, then it might add an extraordinary amount of cost and not be the best way to go. Garage conversions can be wonderful. As Lindsay mentioned, they don't add quite as much value as the detached ADU, but usually they're more affordable. And then you can kind of go on, and I'll talk a little about junior ADUs in more detail later, but are where you capture part of your existing house and create an ADU that can be rented within the envelope of your existing house. So for some precarious hillsides, those could be a good way to capture extra space. Basically, the cheat answer is every one of you is entitled to add an 800 square foot ADU to your property. And that's if you built your house and you're at maximum floor area or maximum buildable area, this new 800 square feet is in addition to that. So if you thought you were at your cap and couldn't build anymore, the state is giving you a pass to build an 800 square foot ADU 4 feet from your rear and side property lines at a minimum of 16 feet tall. Now, local municipalities, and most of them are doing this, can come in and let you build bigger, taller, and add a couple other requirements. But it's by right, without neighborhood review, without complicated planning, you can have 800 square feet. How big your ADU should be, we're really seeing people in this kind of middle, what we call the bread and butter zone. In order to get 1 bedroom, you really want to have around 500, well, we can do it in 400 square feet. To get up to 2 bedroom, 2 bath, it's really 800, 750 is kind of the amount of space you need. We have a little lag in the button, so I'm trying to be good and not over click. Okay. There you go. Then you can also think about how to approach the ADU in terms of how it fits into your overall context. Some people want the ADU to be kind of more of a mini-me, like this middle one, where you match all the architectural details, want the property to feel very cohesive. there are not a lot of architectural mandates in most cities in terms of what it needs to look like. So you can kind of match the roof lines and the siding like the first one, but do different color schemes. And then you can also just be liberated and be completely different in how you approach it. One of the big things we like to talk about is how you design the ADU for multiple functions, privacy, and connection. How you're going to use these ADUs today might be very different in 5 years. We are seeing how they have evolved. For the first one we did in 2008 has been through 3 different occupants. Some of those occupants you wanted to have morning coffee with, and other people you didn't. So this is the main house is up above here. We've got, in this situation, we turned the ADU so it looked away. What that did is give the main house its own private yard. We put in some privacy buffers, made a new walkway, and then the ADU has its private yard. When you want to get together with people, you find a way to make a space work, but that's not true of privacy. If you really want your privacy and independence, you really need to plan for it. Oops, okay, I thought I had one more. Maybe I went too far. Okay. On the contrary, this family really wanted the ADU to connect to the main house. So you can see we use a lot of L shapes because they create these little extra courtyards for the ADU. The bedroom is here looking off, so it's private, and the living room is looking at the big house. And then this is shared outdoor dining and shared outdoor space. And you can see here's that outdoor dining look back at the main house. So these people chose to make the property more connected. They want to utilize the yard. It was for multi-generations where grandparents were in the cottage and the main house with the grandkids were up top. So think about what's right for you. Ask the questions about what you need now and what you want later. Natural light is one of the best ways to make these ADUs feel bigger from a design perspective. But you really want to think about window placement so you're not in a fishbowl. You know, there's these beautiful ADUs online. A lot of them are renderings where they're just like a big glass bar and they look, interesting, but no one really wants to live in that. So think about how you might, in this case, put windows up above the kitchen, add skylights. We often put big windows over the bed so you can have airflow. You can know what the weather's doing. You can get a sense of what's happening, but don't feel like you're on display. And then maximize volume. Most cities, as I mentioned, can have a 16-foot ceiling. You don't really need a 16-foot ceiling in a 500 square foot ADU. It starts to become a little bit more of a canyon. So you can put in things like, we'll often drop the ceiling over the bathrooms and hallways, and then you can either have a little storage. This was a grandkid loft where they could climb up and have a sleeping spot when they stayed. This is one where we added a dormer, and then there was an office and workspace up above. It made the bedroom a little short, but the truth is when you're in your bedroom, you're usually sleeping, so you don't need a lot of height in there. But even adding just bigger spaces makes the small footprint feel better. You can also design to connect to the outside. I mean, Lindsay's right. If you're going to do one of those big glass boxes, it gets very expensive, but you can pick your moments on where you splurge. The other thing you can do is you can think about designing, like we often have corner windows in our dining room areas. So then this room is kind of borrowing the space from outside. And then you can do these great bifold doors that connect the indoors to the outside. And then it feels like your living room space is twice as big because you have the outdoor space, but you're not paying for that extra, built space. And then maximizing small spaces, a lot of it is about built-in storage. If you're choosing to move into this ADU, you are not all of a sudden going to change the way you've lived for 50 years and not have any stuff. So figure out where it goes. Just be smart about how you plan for it. In this ADU, it's pretty small, but we have a TV that actually rises from the counter. So if they want to watch TV, they can have it come up. And when they don't want it in the room, it goes back down. We always do these banquettes because around a table, you need 3 feet of walking space on either side. But in a built-in bench, you can have a lot of visitors, a lot of guests, a lot of grandkids slide in, and then you get storage all below there. For a peninsula and an ADU that's only, what is this? So maybe 18 feet across, you don't need bar stools here when your table's right here. So fill the backside of that peninsula with storage. So you've just added another 12 linear feet of storage. You can really maximize things. Again, here we have like a little built-in bench, but we have storage below. So think about how you can really sculpt the space. You can get into Murphy beds and kind of convertible things. We try to not do as much MacGyvering, like you don't want to necessarily have to do a lot of stuff to go to sleep, but in some small spaces, it's hard to get around that. And there's some really neat companies doing very cool furniture. And then I want to talk about universal design. So this is an ADU we did for a woman who was a bit shorter and also had an issue with her shoulder. We wanted to maximize the height, but we put in these neat devices where she can just grab a handle and the shelves all pull down so they're within reach. So those are just small, clever ways that you can make sure you maximize the space, but make it usable for everyone. The idea of universal design is really, I think this sums it up well. Like this is the vegetable peeler we all know. This is that OXO company, and his wife had arthritis and couldn't use a lot of kitchen tools. And so he developed something that she could use and started that company. But the idea of universal design, people don't like to talk about aging in place, even though we all know the alternative to aging is much worse. Universal design is kind of a friendly way to get everybody to talk about how you could plan your space from the beginning to be more adaptable and usable for everybody. And this, maybe you're going to be healthy and live forever, but you might have a friend that's in a wheelchair or walker and they can't visit you because you didn't think about how they would get into the ADU. One of the coolest things about ADUs is they're a new opportunity to build from scratch. So you can really think about how you design the unit to be more inclusive and have features that just make it easier for you, for grandkids, for everybody. Making sure natural light is incorporated. The way our eyes age, you start not to be able to tell the difference between your counter and your floor. So one simple thing to do is make sure that your counters and your flooring have alternate colors. If they're the same color, what happens is our eyes collapse the surface and you can't see whether it's clean or if there's something on it. So just simply make sure that your counters and your floors contrast, and then that helps your eyes just work a bit better. So there's a lot of things like that. This is an ADU we designed where we put kind of all the built-ins all around the perimeter. So it leaves the floor plan open so you can adapt the furniture easier, you could approach things easier, and it makes the space feel bigger. Built-in showers. This is one of the best things of building new. A built-in shower with no curb, fold-down seats, adjustable shower heads, makes it easier to wash a dog, makes it easier to clean the shower, makes the small shower feel bigger because you don't have these divides, the break, the steps. So it just makes the space feel more wonderful. We love to stick a little skylight up in the bathroom because you don't want to jeopardize your privacy, but you want to have a nice, beautiful space. And it's not going to be like a big primary bathroom you might have in a main house because it's a smaller ADU. So hillsides, we've got a lot of hills in Marin. So the detached ADU can be a great design strategy for how to approach it. This is an ADU we designed where the main house is up above, and then you walked all the way down the stairs and got to the ADU at the bottom. You want to think about a few different things with the hillside design. You want to think about how you preserve your views, how you're making sure that you're not blocking. It's a little hard to see here, but this big house had a very nice view down there. We were hoping to put a roof deck here, but planning had a different idea on that one. But the ADUs, you want to consider when you're building on the hillside that you're most likely going to have more costs for your foundation. You're going to have retaining walls. Those things, everything that goes in the ground is going to be what it is. So you really need to figure out those numbers. You need to figure out if your soil condition is something that would require a more expensive foundation like piers. And then the things that you can't change, just know the price of, and then you can change most of the things that go above ground. So you can be smart about how you approach it. Jimmy from my team is out there. We've developed a big cost worksheet. One thing I invite everybody to do is that people talk about just the cost of the building, but there's the cost of your team, like your architect, your permits, your engineers. There's the cost of the building, but then there's also the cost of infrastructure with ADUs. Do you need a water upgrade? Do you need a sewer upgrade? Do you need fire sprinklers? Those things are going to be what they are. So we've developed a worksheet. Any company you go work with, you should make sure that you're figuring out all the things that can't be changed first. and then design around it so that you can maximize the potential. General rule of thumb is that if you don't have fire sprinklers in your main house, you don't need them in the ADU, but there's kind of a hidden asterisk after that, especially in our fire zones and in our hillsides. I need a better diagram. That I should make a diagram for this, but you have to double check your distance to your fire hydrant. So there's a requirement from where your fire truck parks in front of your house when you call an emergency. That distance to the fire hydrant has to be a certain distance, and it varies from 250 to 600 feet. And then from where the fire truck is at your curb to the back side of where your ADU is going to go, if that exceeds 150 feet, you need fire sprinklers. That could come up. We have a lot of unusual sites and shapes in Marin, so that might come up for some of you. Fire sprinklers inherently aren't that scary. They're usually $7,000 to $10,000, but where it can get more expensive is you have to upgrade your water service. So if you have a little 3/4-inch line coming in for water, and that is not enough to support the fire sprinklers, then you have to upgrade that meter. That can go up to 10, 15,000. And then all of a sudden those things starting to add up. And those are some of those costs you want to figure out ahead of time. Alternatively, this is an ADU we did on the hillside where the main house was down below, and then you went up the hill to the ADU. Designing on a hillside, you want to think about accessibility can be harder to achieve. If you want a nice meandering path, so if someone could get up there, that might be more difficult, harder to avoid stairs. Also for access, a lot of times these hillside sites will have maybe a narrow access, and it's harder to get construction equipment up there. You know, we can build anything, but the cost of it can have an impact on your budget. So if they can't get equipment in there and have to hand dig, people get tired, it's more expensive to offload. We've had contractors be clever and build conveyor belts and some other things, but it will affect your cost. Then we are seeing a lot of properties. This is a property we're doing in Tiburon where I'm sure you guys are familiar, where there's like a steep site, hardly any yard, but there's this big giant basement. When they built the house, they couldn't capture that space as habitable because they were over their buildable area. So we are now capturing this space, creating an ADU down there. It's a simplified process. It's much more smooth line to get a permit. You want to consider how you're going to get natural light in there. You need a window in any bedroom for rescue and for light requirements and ventilation. And then you also have to figure out how you're going to get into this space. So for these clients, they came down the staircase and we added a new stair down into this basement area. In Tiburon, we were required to have it separated from the main house. So there's some questions about access and shared walls, but this can be a really fun way to kind of capture this ADU. I think wound up being like $120,000 because we had all the walls, we had the volume, we just needed to put the infill in. And then other small difficult things are the junior ADU. This is an area behind a garage where we made the garage a bit smaller and captured some underutilized space. You can put in a nice little kitchenette. Junior ADUs can only be 500 square feet. They have to have their own entry. And it always seems backwards, but it needs its own kitchen, but can share a bathroom, which I think they got wrong when they did that one. But this can be a way, let's say you've got a 4 or 5 bedroom house, you're not using it all. You don't really want to go to the cost of adding a detached ADU. These junior ADUs, and also most people, you can have a junior ADU and a detached ADU. So consider that. Like if you're really trying to maximize your property, you want to make sure you have some income strategy. This can be an easy way to do it, which really can keep the cost down. Maximum. Can't exceed 500 square feet. Yep. And then garage conversions. I know this freaks a lot of people out giving up their garage, but a lot of people are just using garage for storage, not parking. And if you have a really expensive hillside lot where the foundations might kind of crush the viability of the project, the garage conversions can be really great. This is the garage from the street. We replaced the garage door, added some windows, and then this is the part of the living space in the garage. These guys had a nice little side yard where we could make a nice entry and court. Generally, a 2-car garage converts really nicely to a 1-bedroom, 1-bath garage, and a 1-car garage makes a cute little studio. And then a lot of people have existing detached garages on their property. A lot of times they're very dilapidated and falling down, but sometimes they can be closer to the property line than you're allowed to build today. This is a garage that we rebuilt into this ADU. But if you have an older building, you can keep the footprint volume of that building and rebuild it to be an ADU and keep the non-conforming setbacks. You might have to do some things like if it's too close to the property line, you really need to make sure that it's fire rated. We need to make sure that we have the right construction on that side so it meets code. But you're allowed to keep that and redo it. Often you're going to completely rebuild those buildings because they're not designed for housing. But on a tighter yard, it can be a value. Yes, your question. The question is about whether you want to take a garage and put an ADU on top of it, and it's in West Marin. I'd have to double check the code of whether you can do that. Usually, there's a lot of cities that are allowing that. So these old buildings that are old garages were not really designed to handle people, and they weren't designed to handle a second floor. So the ones that we've done for that have been great in that it saves yard space, saves space, but they're very expensive because you're usually going to rebuild the whole garage and then the ADU on top. But they can be wonderful. We've done it on sites that just didn't have a lot of other places to put the ADU, and they turned out great. But from a cost perspective, it's often a little more than you might imagine because those the foundation, when you're going to rebuild the whole garage, but they can be wonderful. For WUI zones, so woodland urban interface zones, high fire risk zones, we have to just be mindful of how we detail the buildings and how we think about the construction. So one of the simple ways to do it is to not have any eaves. These eaves can often be a place where embers are going to fly up, start sparks, and can cause a fire. If you really want the eaves and you want to keep that for an architectural reason, we add different fire blocking. We make sure that the material in these eaves is not combustible, and that we're being very smart about how we do that. We'll often do our awnings these days out of metal just because they're more elegant and simple to build. And they're also just non-combustible materials. For WUI strategies, you can consider metal roofing. They do make shingles that are more of a Class A roofing that have the right thing. Your windows and doors, the glass all needs to be tempered. I think I forgot that on my list. Stucco is a wonderful finish for fire resistance. It's a great way to do it. You can also there's a lot of new cement board products that look like siding, look like shingles. You usually have to add another layer of what they call dense glass or another fire rated material behind it to get the right fire rating. And then making sure that your decking and other elements around the yard are not wood, but are either wood that's treated for fire resistance or a composite that is not combustible. And then maintaining your trees. This is a bad example. This is my ADU for my mom, and I need to trim the trees, I noticed in the picture. Okay, quickly, I think I'm getting close out of time. There's different ways to build your ADUs, both from a design and construction standpoint. Custom ADUs can be great for really unique properties, strange geometries. Panelized is where you're going to build the building in sections, flat pack it, and ship it to a site. Anytime you're going from full custom to another offering, there's going to be speed and cost savings, but you're going to have less choices. So you want to try to decide what you're willing to do. Panelized kits often, for our company, the envelope you can't change. So the shape of it, where the windows and doors are, is what it is. But the exterior materials, inside finishes, you can change all you want. So it can be a good way to save money. If you get into the prefab or modular units, they are usually just a list of choices. Like I want this color kitchen, this color outside, and everything is done. If you look at general timelines, custom typically goes, somebody comes visits your site, you have the design and engineering, you have your permit process, and then they build. So it's all linear. Everything happens in a row. With panelized kits, you can start to do some of the on-site construction while the fabrication is happening and shorten that length. You're not going to do as many design changes because the shell doesn't get to change, so you shorten up your design time. And then with prefab, you have even less choices of what you can change, so your design time is shortened. Usually the prefabs, not usually, always, the prefabs are approved by the state of California. So that part gets shortened up, and then you can have the unit being built while the on-site construction is going, so you can tighten up that. There are limitations, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, but this is a custom ADU we built on a very narrow side lot. We had to use very strange geometry, so it needed to be built custom with what we call stick-built construction, which is just 2-bys. The panelized kits, these are where we're building things, part of it off-site. We can do it pre-run with electrical and power. You still need to always, in any scenario, put in your foundation and put in your utilities. So no matter what happens, what way you build, you need to do this part. And it's from this part up that you have choices. And then modular, the whole unit comes on a truck. So the lights are in, the cabinets are in, everything's there. You still need to do your foundation. There's one fun and very scary day where they lift it up over your house into the backyard. And then this is the unit once it's set. So there's a lot of different fun ways to do it. The truth with modular building is that you're going to save money building off-site, but the cost of the crane and the transportation sometimes offsets that cost. So for our modular line, it's not our most affordable choice, but we're in your backyard a lot less, and the whole thing can go a bit faster. So you have to kind of make a decision on those pieces. And I think that's the end of my, I have more time? Okay. I do have more time if we want to do a couple questions. Yeah. I think we are sharing the slides in the recording. Yeah, I'm happy to share my slides. So you can send a note to hello@Inspired ADUs, and we'll send you the slides if you'd like. We also have a lot of content on YouTube that we do to try to educate and follow process. So I'm happy to share the slides if you guys want to email us. Any other questions for me? Yes, sir. Yeah, thoughts on installing solar. So I think solar in general is great. Often the ADUs are smaller, and the amount of solar you can put on them doesn't necessarily get the return. The California Energy Commission finally saw that truth. And so most likely, you can get an exemption. There's a section of the California Energy Code. If the solar you put on an ADU doesn't make more than 1.8 kilowatts, you don't have to install solar. What I like about that is then it can be a choice, because solar is like another $10,000, $15,000. Long-term, these ADUs are built to very extreme energy codes. They're 2x6 walls, they're insulated beyond belief. They have, efficient appliances, lights, et cetera. So the solar offset for the ADU itself doesn't always pencil out, but it usually makes 100% sense for the main house. What I like about getting the solar exemption is that you don't have to do it when you do the ADU. One thing, if anybody starts moving forward with solar on their big house, tell them that you're planning an ADU one day, because you do want them to size the unit to help offset that cost. So I think it's great environmentally. I think it's very good to do on your main house. If you can add a few panels to the ADU, that's great. A lot of times they're not making sense for ADUs unless you're getting, the ADU laws are growing, so we are seeing like 1,200, 1,500 square foot ADUs. So solar would make sense on those, but on the tinier ones, not as much. You're welcome. Yes, sir. There is a loophole with the all-electric. Most cities are encouraging you to go to all-electric. There was a lawsuit where Berkeley restaurants sued Berkeley and said, you can't make us not use gas. So there's technically a loophole in that you can put gas in if you want. But keep in mind, a lot of the cost is, do you need to upgrade can your gas lines support gas in the ADU? Or do you have to upgrade the line? Is it worth upgrading that service? If you are using them for age in place, we don't recommend gas because you can be forgetful and forget to turn it off. Switching to an induction stove where you don't get burned and it'll turn off automatically can be a smarter way to design for that. So technically right now we're in a loophole where you can add gas, but typically we don't because the cost isn't worth it. Yes. Well, physically, I live on the peninsula. My office is in Oakland. Jimmy, who's on our team, is in Mill Valley. So we've built from Roner Park. We're just finishing one in Roner Park down to Campbell is kind of our, and Santa Cruz area. So we build all around. Yeah, Gen 1, sorry. Rule of thumb is $500 per square foot. $500 per square foot. You can certainly, it's like people say, how much is my ADU going to cost? And I like to use the car analogy. Like, can you get me a car? Well, I could get you a Yugo, or I could get you a Lamborghini, and I still got you a car. So one of the challenges with building ADUs or with construction in general is a chicken and an egg problem, right? So how much is it going to cost? Well, we don't know what it's going to cost until we know what you want to build. We don't know what are we doing the Lamborghini? Like then we could tell you what it's going to be more than $500 square foot. But again, there are these three buckets, right? There's the cost of the building, the cost of your team, architects, engineers. A lot of times we need soils reports in Marin. We got fault lines, different soils. That's one bucket. You've got the cost of the building itself, everything from the ground up, and then everything that's below ground. And the below ground is where the mysteries lie. We can give you really good numbers on the building and up, but what you really want to dive into is what are the requirements from your local city in terms of engineering? And then what are all the infrastructure costs below ground that we can't see with our X-ray vision? Yes, sir. Yes, question about electrical panels and what the pros and cons of doing a separate electrical meter or jumping off. PG&E has made that decision for you, I'm afraid. You will now be adding your own electrical meter for every ADU. There's a good movement of trying to get the utilities cleaned up and corrected, but right now, as PG&E stands, you have to add a new meter. PG&E is super delayed. They're really behind. So if you're considering doing an ADU, stop recording. No, go ahead and try to start upgrading your service, like in the name of like adding solar or electric cars or something, just to get the ball rolling with PG&E because they can be really delayed. We're seeing ADUs that we can build in 6 months, but then they're waiting 3 to 5 months for their PG&E service. So you do want to try to plan that ahead of time. Follow up. They don't usually have to do a whole new drop, but they have a very inefficient engineering way of looking at your property. So sometimes if you have a 200 amp panel for the main house, you can kind of pull those apart and make 2 separate meters. The ADU now by electrical code has to have its own 100 amp with a 125 bus bar rating. So some properties we go to have a 400 amp panel, so you can kind of redivide that. That's usually not the case in older houses. You probably have a 100 amp panel on your old house if you haven't done any major electrical work, and then you need to upgrade it. Yeah, yeah. You can, yes, the question is garage conversions. Do you have to replace the parking? No, 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 no parking replacement. And if you're building an ADU within a half a mile of public transit, a detached ADU, no parking requirements. So the state has come in and said, you can convert your garage, you don't have to replace the parking. If you build an ADU and you're within a half mile of a bus stop, public transit, you don't have to add any parking. Yeah. How am I on time before I keep going with questions? 10:45. Oh, okay. Yes, sir. Electrical question. The JADUs are the exception. JADUs can share utilities with the main house. They've updated that. So you used to have to put in separate systems, but now they can share. So the junior ADU is a way to do it if you want to try to keep the systems a bit more streamlined from cost. Yes, madam. The permitting process, so fun. Yeah, so the state's done a good thing and local cities, and we can talk to our great planners here about it, but every city is supposed to have pre-approved plans in place as of last January, so that the city has looked at them already, and then you just are looking more at your specific site in terms of foundation and placement. We're not seeing a lot of efficiency in that system yet. Technically, once the permits application is complete, it's supposed to be reviewed within 60 days. Now, the challenge is if you put in a permit and they say you're missing this thing after they've like waited a few weeks to tell you that, like your 60 days doesn't start until they say, okay, we have everything we need. Cities are doing a great job of trying to expedite ADU permits. They really are trying their best. They're seeing this as a good way to add more housing and are really trying to be helpful. I would try to encourage you to plan on 3 to 4 months for your permit approval. But there are some jurisdictions that can be fussy. So you want to go in and ask them what their turnaround time is, or ask your architect what the turnaround time is. Even the modular units, which are approved by the state, still have to go through the local approval in terms of the foundation and the utility connections and where the unit's placed on site. So plan on 3 to 4 months. I like to say a recovering optimist. So everything can go faster, but so the way it works, yeah, is you want to go through, and this is a good question to talk about, Lindsay, and I've talked to a few people here this morning about is it the right time to build my ADU? What about tariffs? What about construction costs? What about all those things? Well, the truth is you're not going to build your ADU until you've done this whole part. So there is some logic, and I'm not just saying this because I get paid for this part, but of designing your ADU and being ready. The other reason to start investing in design is that you don't really know what it's going to cost until you've designed it, and you don't really know what your site needs until you've done the feasibility. A lot of companies like ours will do a feasibility, like if you're not sure after an initial consultation and you want more information, like there's some people that have kind of precarious distances from fire hydrants or other things, and you can have someone come out and do a feasibility study. I actually think the Marin Center does feasibility studies. Scott and Trisha are here who are putting on this event. They can do things and help with that, but it will take you like pre-approved plans at the city level can help you go faster. We've permitted over 250 ADUs, so we have a catalog of plans you can shop from if you don't want to do a whole new design. But if you do that, you can condense your cost and your design timeline, but you still do have this permit chunk, which is usually 2 to 4 months before you could start building. And the other thing is to think about the timeline of your project with our weather, right? We're getting ready to go into the rainy season, which we call the design season. Great time to do project planning, great time to think about what you really want. Then you could get your design going, you could get your permit in, and then in summer you could build your ADU. The great thing of these ADUs are really about 6 months to build. They're not that complicated, so they go fast. Everybody likes each other in the end. It's pretty fun. Yes, in the back. The big thing with subdividing, I think, is going back to thinking about privacy and how you're going to place things. You're going to want to think about the easement and access. There are new laws on the books, SB 9. There's actually a ton of new housing laws that will help you add more density and potentially subdivide your lot. SB 9 is kind of a whole nother lecture and a whole nother talk, but one of the big things you want to think about is the utilities. It might be worth upgrading to completely separate utilities. Like the ADU can still pull off your water meter. It can still tie into your sewer connection. If you really want to have a subdivision, then you need to talk to, think about how you separate your utilities out so it's very clean when you do the separate, the lot split. There's also ways that you can add more units using SB 9, where you can add another primary unit without doing a lot split. So there's ways to use that for density. You don't have to go ahead and do the lot split now. You could do it later in the future if you felt like you needed it from a financial standpoint. Yes, sir. Maximum number of units on a property is a little complicated. I believe so HCD, the Housing and Community Development Group at the state, is who oversees ADU laws. They're the ones that are implementing them. They're helping people if cities aren't behaving and not following the ADU laws, and give them a little credit because they're changing rapidly and it's really hard to keep up. HCD is your ally at the state, and they will help interpret things. The last I heard, and Ryan O'Connell would be a great person to answer this, so we should ask him too, but last interpretation I heard is that you can put in a junior ADU, an attached ADU, and a detached ADU, but that doesn't always work when you go to file the permit. Our planner wants to say no. Yeah, is that right? Okay, the planner from here says yes, I got it right. Ding, ding, ding. 3. No, she said yes. So it's 3. Attached, detached, and junior. Yes. There's a question. If your garage is not attached to your house, it's not. If it is attached to your house, yes, that can be an attached. That's one. The junior ADU, so you'd have to do it differently. The junior ADU has to be within the existing walls of your main house. So you can't, like, you could put the junior ADU in your garage. You can't put, and then it's one attached and one detached. So you can't put the detached unit above your house because it would be attached to your house. Yes. But there are a lot of other codes that are, again, probably another lecture. SB 684, SB 1121, SB 1121, then there's a 1231 that gets you to all sorts of other density that wasn't possible last year. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. No, so the question is about junior ADUs. Do they have to be internally connected to the main house? If they're sharing a bathroom, yes, they have to have a connection, but they don't have to be connected. You do need to double check with the cities because the cities have a nuance of whether they can ask you for a connection or completely restrict a connection. I've seen a lot of variation in that by municipality, but junior ADUs are within the existing envelope, 500 square feet, and have their own kitchen. That could joining rooms, yes. Again, ADU laws are changing rapidly. Like, you wouldn't believe how fast they're changing. So you'd need to double check. Everything you knew 3 years ago is probably irrelevant. I'm sorry to say. Yeah, it's putting some grays in my hair, keep me on my toes, but yeah. Yes, yes, sir. I'd love to talk about sewage. Thank you. Yes. And I also forgot to talk about septic, which is great. Thank you. Sewer connection, there's a fun thing called your sewer lateral that goes from the front of your property to the street. That has to be verified that it's whole and sound. Anytime you file a building permit, you have to make sure that proof that that's up to date. That anytime a house changes hands, you're required to make that up to date too, since like I think 2014 or something around there. So if you bought a property in the last 10 years, it's probably been improved, but you do have to have a certificate and show that that's been improved. If you haven't done that part, then you need to update it as part of the project. To connect the ADU to the sewer lateral, they call it, typically it has to get connected downslope of the main house. So if your house is up high or the ADU is in the back, you have to make a new trench and connection. And to move sewage with gravity, you need it to drop 1/4 inch per foot. So from where the ADU is placed to where the connection is to the sewer lateral, you need a slope. If you don't have that slope, if you're building up above or the other way around, you can put in a sewer ejector pump. The sewer ejector pump will pump it to where it's needed. They're not terribly expensive. They're not that hard to figure out, but one day it will break because it's a mechanical device. So The more we can move sewage with gravity, the better, but it's certainly not something that's insurmountable. Now, septic, on the other hand, if you have a septic system at your property, septic is one of the few things I've seen that can stop an ADU project. Almost all these other barriers have been moved away, but septic is one of the few things that can complicate it both from a cost and a land perspective. So often, if you have a septic system that was put in, my house was built in 1985, we're on septic. That system doesn't meet today's codes. So to touch that system was a bad idea. So for our ADU, we had enough room, luckily, where we put in a new system for the ADU. You have to do perk tests. You're going to need a septic designer on your team. You have to make sure that the ground can absorb and percolate and get the septic system to work. And then it's probably going to add, from the engineering, perk tests, and the system itself, another $40,000 to your project. So it can be a ticket item. That's one of the few things I've seen that kind of can derail. But again, everything that's not changeable, figure it out, put it in your budget, have a list for all those things. We have this, I feel like it's almost kind of like a doomsday checklist where we've made a list of everything that could come up and put a scary placeholder next to it. And while people don't always like to see those numbers, I'd rather you see it today than in 6 months when you've already invested a bunch of time. So figure out all the math. You can expand existing systems. Sometimes you just have to add a new leach field. I can talk a lot more about septic. If you want to, you can talk to me afterwards. Yes, sir. Yeah. So the question is, in a septic system, if you're designing an ADU, does the ADU count as an extra bedroom? Yes, a studio and 1 bedroom will count as 1 new bedroom for your existing septic system. And then obviously, if you ask 2 or 3 bedrooms ADUs, then you have to design for that. Yes, yes, sir. The electrical requirements of PG&E to date is requiring that you need a new electrical meter for your ADU. So what that means is where your existing single ADU meter is now, often we're putting in what they call a dual meter, which will have your meter for the main house and a new one for the ADU. Sometimes with where the electrical service is coming in and where your power pole is, you can do a new drop sometimes, which is where you bring in a new line from the power pole and then just put a meter on the ADU and leave your big house alone. Sometimes that can be simpler, but that's up to PG&E and their wisdom. If you have only 100 amps to your main house, then yes, you will need to increase. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Our company does do the site assessments. We do them on the computer because we have a couple neat tools where we can drop in different size ADUs and look at all the distances and do that. We offer that complimentary, as do most of the other companies here. So I don't want to just promote myself, but site assessment is the first step. What can you do? What are the red flags? What size ADU do you really need? Just because you can build 1,200 square feet doesn't really mean you need to. Something on that note, on square footage, the smaller the ADU, the more expensive per square foot, because you're sticking all the expensive parts of a whole house in a very tiny footprint. So a 300 square foot ADU is going to be more expensive per square foot than like a 1,000 square foot ADU, because typically in a larger area, you're going to offset the expenses over the square footage. So it seems counterintuitive, but there is kind of a sweet spot around 750, 800. Which is gets you a lot of bang for your buck, but isn't super high, super low. Also, check with your cities. If you stay under 500 square feet, there are some perks. You don't pay school fees. You don't pay impact fees when you file your permit. Those are both just one-time permit fees. But again, they add up to your overall bill. If 500 square feet gets you what you need and you can stay under that, then there's some perks to that. But check with your cities to find out what they are. Like, in Palo Alto, they don't want you to go over 750 square feet, so the impact fee is $25,000. In most cities, it's like $1,200, so it's not a big deal. If you stay under 750 square feet, then you don't pay impact fees, but you do pay school and park fees. Yes, sir. Setbacks from neighbors' wells. I did a well one. I don't remember the answer to that one, but I could follow up with you on that. Yes, sir. Okay, the question's about flood zone. That's a great question. So if your property is in a flood zone, then there is a base elevation that has been determined by someone who will say what level your house needs to be in. There's a couple of ways to do with the additions for flood zone. So a junior ADU has to be within the envelope of your main house. So you're just taking existing space. So you shouldn't have to necessarily you might have to add steps from the outside to get in. There's also, if you do an addition, an attached ADU, attached ADU in a flood zone, if the construction cost of the attached ADU doesn't exceed 50% of the value of the main house, you don't have to elevate it. There's a loophole, but you have to do a lot of paperwork and math for that one to make it work. And then otherwise, if you're going to build in the flood zone, then you have to figure out the base elevation. Your surveyor would do that and let you know what height. And then you'd have to design to that and think about stairs, ramps, et cetera, and the cost. And then you're also up against the height limit. When you're designing higher for an elevation, a flood elevation, that 16 feet height limit, like if you have to build up 2.5 feet for the flood, comes out of the 16 feet, which is still doable, but you want to consider that math. Am I not out of time? Have I not been talking for a really long time? I mean, I can keep going, but okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, yeah. And then I'm good. All right, our next speaker is technically not till 10:45, so I'll keep going. Yes. Okay, unincorporated Mill Valley. Right. Mm. Okay, great question. What happens when people converted their garage or built an ADU without a permit? Obviously, you shouldn't do that. But if it had been done, or if you inherited a property that had a legal ADU, luckily, as of January 1, there's a legalization process. AB 2533, maybe? Ryan O'Connell, who's with How to ADU, is also a really good resource to follow. He has like a Facebook and YouTube channel. He does a lot of great educational stuff. How to ADU is Ryan O'Connell. He's here today. He started us off and he'll close us out, but he has a lot of good technical knowledge on that. But there is a process now to legalize things, so you don't have to. What was happening before is that if you had an illegal unit, you would have to prove that it met 2025 building codes, which obviously it's not going to do. So then people just didn't legalize it. The state saw that. They've put into place a new, anytime you're ready, Scott, I'm good. But there is a legalization. There's still some gray area. The biggest concern I have is the foundations. The way the legalization, you can go through and make sure you have light and ventilation, you have a window for egress and safety, that your plumbing and electrical are good. But the hardest thing to prove is there's still a little bit of an ambiguity in the language that says you have to make sure that the foundation is adequate. And like, who determines that? It's the building department will come out and determine that. But those legalizations, that's the biggest unknown on it. And now I think Scott's ready to go. Yeah, and we're going to do a panel with questions, and I'm here today too, so I'm happy to keep talking to y'all. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, well, we have a choice because we are running ahead of schedule. So I see everyone here paying rapt attention. We're about to get into the new laws of 2025. Do you want to stretch your legs for 5 minutes and grab some coffee and some snacks, and we'll come back at let's come back at 10:50. And then we'll get into the laws, and then we'll do the roundtable at the end.
Recording progress.
Okay. If everyone can take their seats. Well, thank you all for your patience, and I hope you've enjoyed the coffee and pastries. We're going to be talking about the new 2025 ADU laws. But first, about me. I'm Scott Johnson. I'm the director of the Napa Sonoma ADU Center and ADUMarin.org. Collectively, the ADU Center at total. We are a nonprofit that partners with both Marin County, most of the Marin cities, Napa County, and the Napa cities to provide homeowners with information about what their options are and what the rules are around ADUs. On our various websites, we have a lot of tools and resources. We have a downloadable workbook. We have a calculator that helps you understand the costs. We have listing of ADU rules for your jurisdiction. Stories and floor plans. We've done 30 webinars. We're doing one in 2 weeks on October 15th, or actually 11 days, about fair housing and becoming a new landlord. I highly recommend everybody who's thinking about building an ADU come to that webinar. That's on October 15th. And then we also do 1-hour feasibility consultations for homeowners who sign up via our website. If you're in one of the participating cities or county, so Marin and Napa, you can sign up for a 1-hour consultation. I'm sorry, yes? Thank you. So my introduction, I'm Scott Johnson. I'm the director of the ADU Center, and we run ADUMarin.org and NapaSonomaADU.org. And we're a nonprofit that works in partnership with the jurisdictions. But the feasibility consultations, if you're thinking about an ADU and you're not sure what you want to do, you want some more information, I highly recommend that you sign up for one of those. I see some people in the audience who've been through them. So, you know, good or bad, let people know how they were. But what we're going to focus on this morning is the new laws for 2025. And I'm not sure where my clicker went. Boop. There we go. Okay. There are 4 key laws that changed ADUs in 2025. And I'm going to focus on the first 2. But first, is there anybody here who has a duplex or a small apartment building or some kind of multifamily project they're thinking about adding an ADU to? Oh, 1. Okay. We'll cover it quickly. But I want to focus on the first 2. The 4 key laws are there's a new pre-approved plans program that's statewide. There's new legislation that allows for a easier pathway to legalize an unpermitted ADU. There have been some changes to the multifamily ADU laws. And then Coastal Commission. And Coastal Commission, I can say in one sentence, that's coming. If you're in the coastal zone, the Coastal Commission has more rules than if you're not in the coastal zone. And all this law for 2025 says is that the Coastal Commission needs to look at ADUs a little more carefully and work with HCD. So there's no changes coming until probably July of next year. So we're going to wipe that one off the list. That was the first one that's easy to get done. And we're going to focus on pre-approved plans first. So the pre-approved plans law is, from a legal perspective, and disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, but from a legal perspective, the pre-approved plans law is very simple. It says that every city and county in the state has to come up with a process that allows for pre-approved ADU plans. And that's basically it. It doesn't push much more than that. And what that means is that Corte Madera has to have a process in place in their planning department where an architect can submit a set of ADU plans that they are then reviewed and approved. Then anytime that specific set of plans comes through the planning department again, it's automatically approved, right? There are no changes, it's approved. It's gone through once, that's it, done. Which is good. It's going to potentially reduce costs. It's going to potentially reduce time to approval. And the architect can ask for that set of plans to be listed on City of Corte Madera's website. And this works for Marin County or City of San Jose or anyone. So that you as potential ADU builders can go to your city's website and say, what's been pre-approved in my town? Do I like any of those designs? Do I like this architect? Maybe I can get that set of plans for far less money than going and getting it drawn from scratch. So it's a process law. It allows for something that wasn't really common before. And it's good, but it's not a panacea. These plans are not free. They don't hand them out. You still have to pay the architect for them. And they aren't permit ready in that there is no foundation plan. It's from the foundation up. It's the structure itself that gets pre-approved. So there's no foundation plan, there's no utility plan, but with ADUs, almost everybody is looking to try and save as much money as possible, how to reduce their costs, reduce the time. And this is actually a good method for that, because if you like the design, then you don't have to go through that design process. You don't have to spend 2 months or longer drawing out those figuring out where the windows are, figuring out where all that detail is going to go. You just need to work on your site plan, where the foundation is, where the utilities hook up. So with pre-approved plans, you can save time and money, but it's not, it's not done. You don't get a set of plans that are already, ready to build. That's still a process. And that's simply because every ADU is unique. Every parcel, every property has its own challenges, where the water comes in. I'm sure that Carrie was talking about that in design. Like, every ADU project is unique in its own way. And so you can only pre-approve so much. So it's a good step. And as I say here, and good and not so good, it's less expensive. Most architects sell their pre-approved plans for far less than it would cost to design it as a custom plan, because they can sell them multiple times. You know that the city's already approved that building, so as long as you don't change that plan, it will be approved. And it's also a really good source to look at ADU designs in your town that have been approved. You can see what's out there, what architects are working in my area. So not intended as part of the law, but to me, I think is actually one of the shadow benefits of the pre-approval law, is that it's a great source to see different architects' designs, their styles, and who's working in your area. Because when we talk with homeowners, one of the common questions we get is, who do I call next? I want to build an ADU. You help me figure out what I can. What's next? And it's usually trying to find an architect. And that can be hard to do if you've never done it before. So the pre-approved plans, they're all listed on the city's website somewhere. The not so good, as I said, the plans are not free. They'll cost you a couple of $1,000s typically. They're not project ready, and the program is new. When architects submit plans to the city, it costs them thousands of dollars. They need to do the engineering, they need to do the energy calculations for the efficiency. So architects are slow to spend $4,000, $6,000, $8,000 to submit a plan to a pre-approval program. So we're going to see this program grow over time. You're in October, so it's been active for 10 months. And there aren't that many plans listed, but 2, 3, 4 years from now, there'll probably be many more plans listed. And it is statewide. So it's going to gain momentum as time goes on. We actually, for Napa Sonoma, we designed a program very similar to this that we piloted in 2021 and saw kind of how it played out over a couple of years. And it really does take some time for this program to kind of gain steam and become really useful. So that's pre-approved plans. Take questions about any of that for the pre-approved. I guess I'll do it right now. Yes? Okay. How's this? Okay, thank you. So the next law, I think this one's actually a real big game changer. This is what's known as the amnesty law. And previously, if anyone had an unpermitted ADU in their yard and they wanted to legalize it, they would have to bring that ADU up to current building standard, regardless of when it was built. If it was, built in the 80s or 90s, it would have to be brought up to 2025 building code standards. And that is a very challenging, sometimes impossible, and very expensive process. And the process of trying to legalize an ADU, depending on the building department and the code inspectors, they could red tag your building. They could make you tear it down. We saw this all over California, that many unpermitted ADUs that were not unsafe, that they were being torn down simply because they were unpermitted. This law was meant to give a pathway, to give a process to people who had unpermitted ADUs that were safe to get them permitted. And so if the ADU was built before 2020, it only needs to meet the requirements of a certain section of the health and safety code, which frankly is a much lower bar than the 2025 building code. The 2025 building code has a lot of energy efficiency, air quality recommendations, a lot of requirements that aren't in the health and safety code. Health and safety is concerned about, no standing water. Is there a foundation? Is there a heater? Is there some insulation? Is there a roof? So if you meet the standards of the health and safety code, then the ADU is required to be permitted. Even if it doesn't meet the requirements of a current ADU under ADU law, if it meets the health and safety code, the city must permit your unpermitted ADU. And they recognize that this can still be kind of a big project. So you can have a third party, like a general contractor, come and inspect your unpermitted ADU, so you're not involving the jurisdiction, you're not involving the city or the county, to say, does this meet this checklist? And then you can submit that to the city. They will do their own inspection, but you can give you kind of a sense of, is this going to pass or not? Or do I have serious problems or not that I have to fix? Any problems that are found, any problems that don't meet the health and safety code, when they are fixed, they have to be up to current building code. But that's still a much lower bar to get over than what it was in 2024. I saw a recent study where for every permitted ADU, there are probably 3 to 4 unpermitted ADUs in California. So, in the last 5 years, we've built tens of thousands of ADUs. There are probably hundreds of thousands of unpermitted ADUs across the state. And many of them are not dangerous. They're just not legal. This is a pathway to allow for homeowners to legalize, to get, coming out of the cold with a legal unit that they can rent on the open market and not increase a bunch of liability. If you have an unpermitted ADU and you rent it to someone and there's ever an issue, there's a house fire, there's a dispute, you as the homeowner have brought on a tremendous amount of liability on yourselves by renting that unpermitted, unlivable space. So this amnesty program is a really, really forward-thinking, I think, action by the state to say, look, we recognize the reality. They're out there. Let's try and get them, make sure that at least that they are safe. So as I say, it's a realistic path towards legalization of ADUs. There's a standardized set of requirements that everyone and the cities and the counties have to post this standard on their website. Marin cities have led the way in a lot of these. As soon as this law got passed, or very quickly soon after this law got passed, Larkspur, Corte Madera, Mill Valley, they were putting these plans, these lists of requirements up on their website. So they've done a great job about embracing this and recognizing the reality of the situation. We need more housing. We want it to be safe. This is a way that can happen. So if you know folks who have an unpermitted ADU, let them know about this program. It's a really, really good program. It's still, as I said, not so good. You still may need to fix things. There's still costs involved. You still need to file for a permit for this. And what we see is, because this is still a relatively new law, and this is probably a trend you will hear me talk about more, because it's new, adoption and implementation of this law is not consistent, and not every city has done as well as the cities of Marin. So there are places around the state where they've done nothing about this law. They haven't advertised it. They don't have a process in place. They're supposed to, but they haven't. But we've seen so far in Marin that they've done a really good job about making this a priority, because we need more housing. The other critical piece is that there's an amnesty part of this, and that's what it's called, the amnesty law, is that when requested, and I say that carefully, so if you have an unpermitted ADU, you want to request the 5-year amnesty as part of your process of starting this legalization, because you will get 5 years to fix any problems before there are code enforcement actions, right? So you get for an ADU. This is all for an ADU. That gives you time to fix the problem, to get it inspected, and to get it on record so that they don't, red tag or make you tear down your building. This is a really important one, I think, for a lot of the North Bay. Multifamily. I know we're going to talk about this very quickly, but they've changed the rules so that it used to be you could have, if you had a duplex or an eightplex, you could build, and you had the space, you could build 2 detached ADUs on your property. Now you can build up to 8 with a 1-to-1 match of apartments you already have. So if you have a duplex and you've got the space, you can build 2 ADUs. If you have a quadplex, you can build 4 detached ADUs. If you have an 8-unit building and you have the space, you can build up to 8 ADUs by right. Ministerial, same thing as everything else. It's much easier. There's no design review. There's no commission hearings. By right, you're allowed to build up to 8 if you have 8 units on your property already. They're a little different than regular ADUs. They're limited to 800 square feet. And you have to have the space for them, which in most cases, most multifamily properties don't. But this allows for, where there's already some density, this allows for more where it makes sense. Parking. Yeah, so parking is with ADUs, for the most part, you don't have, it's usually a 1 parking spot per unit. And there are a lot of exceptions to that rule. If you're within half a mile of transit, if you're within a historic district, parking is not necessarily required. So parking is I say at a maximum, it's going to be 1 space per unit, but many, many, many cases, it's not required that way. Yeah, I think it's much the same, but you've caught me out. I don't remember off the top of my head, and I don't have it on my slide. So thank you for that. I'll have to look it up. And then let's see. And this is a bonus law. This isn't a new one, but this one I think is another one of those sleeper laws that's really important for you folks to know about. The state passed what we call condoization, AB 1033. And what this does is it gives the cities and counties an option to allow for ADU projects, ADU properties to be turned into, a 2-unit condo, the smallest condo development. And it took me a long time to wrap my head around why this was such an important law. We see at the ADU Center, the vast majority of people who come through our programs are planning on building an ADU with family in mind, either now or 5 or 10 years in the future. Grown kids who can't afford to move back to Marin, aging parents who want to downsize or move out of the big house into a smaller, easier to maintain house and let the kids have the big house. What condoization allows from that perspective is, like my example, I've got adult kids who can never afford to buy in Sonoma County where I live. It's not going to happen. But if we built an ADU and went through the condoization process, they could get financing for that condo as their first home. They can then build equity. And so we can build a small unit that the greater construction market is not building. Construction market is not building 500 square foot units. And it allows for a different set of financing. It allows for a different set of equity gain. So we see a lot of multi-generational households be able to build wealth in a way that wasn't available before this law. It's like with all this, it's not super simple. There's some legal process that goes through. You start to get into condo law. You have to register a plat map. Like there are steps that have to happen. And most people recommend getting a lawyer who knows condo law to help you through this. But for some folks, it makes a ton of sense because the financing options are much, much greater for a traditional condo purchase than it is for an ADU. And it allows for, if you're building with family, it allows for people who either could reinvest funds from a house they've sold if they're downsizing, or for people who've never been able to afford to buy to build something that will get them into the housing market. So this one's important and doesn't get spoken about much outside of ADU planner circles. But the critical thing is when I called all the cities that we work with and said, hey, are you guys going to do this? They said, if we get directed by our city council, by our board of supervisors, we need homeowners who are interested in this to go out and say, hey, we want this. Let's adopt this. We see this. San Jose did it first. I think Berkeley, Alameda, and several other communities have adopted it recently. But if the flexibility and to have this option in your community, you have to talk to your elected officials and say, this is something that I want to at least have discussed. A side hand. Well, it becomes a good question, and it becomes like any other condo. So there is a real estate tax implication, and we haven't seen enough projects go through, and I haven't seen one come through in Marin because there isn't any 1033 properties yet. So we haven't seen that process happen. So my unsatisfying answer is it would be taxed like any other condo project ultimately. But what that exactly looks like, I know the ADU property tax is different. But with condoization, it turns it from an ADU project into a condo. If that helps. Yeah, I believe it's a good question, and I don't know the detailed answer to that. I will talk to the assessor's office about that and see what they say. I will say for those who don't know the audience with ADUs, when you build an ADU, it doesn't affect your existing property taxes, your existing house, your existing land. That tax doesn't change, but you will be taxed on the construction value of your ADU. So yeah, so then because the garage is not living space, garage is not living space, not usually counted as living space from a tax assessor's perspective. So it doesn't affect your house very much. I don't think they won't reassess your house is I think fundamentally what it is. They will, if it costs you $120,000 to do a ADU in your garage, they're going to tax you based on that construction value. And then you may want to reassess your house because it no longer has a garage, so it may be worth less or differently. Right. Yeah. Thank you. So he's saying if you built a ADU in your garage, how does that affect your property taxes? And then a second point was, some of the changes, the second meter, the additional plumbing, that's going to offset some of the things as well. Do I have your point right there, sir? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Questions, answers? Yes. Okay, so she asked about owner occupancy on ADUs. Great question. Thank you. There are for what I think of as standard ADUs, there's no owner occupancy. If you own a property and you build an ADU on it, you can rent them both out. If you build a junior ADU, and we'll define a junior here in just a moment, but if you build a junior ADU on your property, then there is owner occupancy required. On multifamily, there's not owner occupancy required. It's only on juniors at this point, junior ADUs. And there are some programs around that are not about the regulation that require owner occupancy. If you're from Napa, Napa has an amazing affordable ADU loan, but they require owner occupancy to file for that affordable ADU loan. Was that? That's right. That's right. So with a junior, so juniors can't be condoized. It's only for regular ADUs. A junior ADU is, this is a subclass of ADUs that have some more restrictions on it, but you're allowed for every property that can build a home on it, you're allowed both a regular house, a junior ADU, and a regular ADU. And there's a special option for a third, which I'll get to in a moment. But for a junior, it must come from existing enclosed space in the main house, not living space, but enclosed space. I say this because the law states specifically that if you build a junior ADU, it can come from the attached garage. And it must be limited to 500 square feet. There must be owner occupancy, And in most places, you are limited on the size and type of kitchen that you can build. No 220 appliance. They call it an efficiency kitchen. If you've been to IKEA and seen those little countertop kitchens, that's kind of what they're talking about. So no 220 stove, a smaller kitchen sink, things like that. Most places require that, but not all. It's a must or a should. So some places you must have that for a junior ADU. Sometimes you don't have to have an efficiency kitchen. Sir. It does. So for owner occupation, he asked if the owner lives in the junior ADU, does that satisfy the owner occupation? And it does. You just have to be on the property in one of the units. Yeah. For the junior, so it has to come from existing space. So nope, doesn't count because it's detached. So existing space for the main house. So attached garage, yes. Detached garage, no. Yeah, yeah. So we see people who will split. They have a two-story house. They'll split a section of the second story off, and put an exterior entrance and a stairway. That can be a junior if it's under 500 square feet. It doesn't have to be a junior if it's under 500 square feet. You can do an interior conversion that's not a junior. So you've got, one junior, one regular in the main house. You can do a 300 square foot ADU in the main house if you want to. It's kind of up to you. Sir. So garage conversion, if you go up one story, that counts as your main ADU. That's an attached ADU because you've added space. There's a case actually I was discussing with a planner last week where they built a attached ADU on their detached garage. It's under 500 square feet, and they want to convert that to a junior. Well, they can't for two reasons. It's on a detached garage, and it's added space to the house. That's right. So for an attached garage, they're applicable. And the other kind of unique thing about a junior ADU is that you can share bathroom facilities with the junior ADU. So with a regular ADU, in almost all cases, you can't have a door connecting between the ADU and the main house. With the junior, you can, and you can share a bathroom. They still have to have an exterior door, but you can have an interior door to a bathroom as well. Sir. That's right. With the junior, so designated parking for regular ADUs. There is no parking requirement for junior ADUs. And I will say that yes, there is a designated parking spot for a regular ADU. There are a lot of exceptions for when parking is required, though I also recommend, and people I know who've built ADUs, even if you aren't required to do parking, if you can put a parking spot somewhere, do so. It will make everyone's lives much easier. How do you know if your lot is big enough to add an ADU? That is a great question. And I would recommend that you sign up for a consultation via ADU Marin or Napa Sonoma, depending on where you are, because we'll look at an aerial of your property and we'll talk about what you're hoping to do and what seems to make sense. The space issue is one there. I always think of these things that there's a regulatory issue and there's a financial issue. And the regulatory side is that in many cases you could build an ADU, but you're on a steep hillside and there's a creek fairly nearby, and the amount of foundation work or retaining walls make it, from a financial perspective, it makes no sense. So with regular ADUs, you have reduced setbacks. You have a 4-foot setback from the rear and a 4-foot setback from the side of your property. That's far less than your main house typically has. So it allows for room to go in the backyard where, it's particularly in smaller lots. We saw a lot of houses built in the 90s where the main house is right up against the main house setbacks. ADU setbacks allow for something to happen there. But it really depends on your property. It depends on what you're trying to do. There's also often you want to have some separation between buildings for fire safety. So that can also eat up space. So yeah, she asked a very technical question. Thank you. I love you for this because I have to often, my family often reminds me to not go too deep on these subjects when I start talking about them. So let me preface this with a couple of disclaimers. One is what we've been talking about is what the state requirements are today. There are variations to those. And what the state has said is everybody, all the cities and counties, you have to do at least this good. You can do better. You can allow for more ADUs. You can allow for, more options, but you have to do at least this good to be, compliant with state law. Marin County has chosen a different path where they have a slightly different variation on how many ADUs you are allowed and what sizes they can be. Often because county properties tend to be larger. There tends to be more space. And if you remember a little while ago, I referenced sort of the third ADU that I didn't go into because I wasn't sure how technical I wanted to get with everybody. So bear with me. The state has recently clarified. The true best answer I can give on this is from the state perspective, one junior coming from existing space, 500 square feet, right, can share a bathroom. One detached, typically 850 to 1,000 to 1,200 square feet, depending on your city. Fully, it's a full house, right? Foundation, bathroom, kitchen, full kitchen. Attached, up to often same size, 850, 1,000, depends on where you're at, but in that range, right? Theoretically, 2-bedroom. So the attached and detached are your main ADUs, and they add livable space to the property. There's the third shadow option, and this isn't the county, so I'm going to get to that if I can get there. The third shadow ADU option is an interior conversion that does not add space to the footprint of your house. That you can have that as well as a junior, as well as a detached. So let's say you have a 4,000 square foot house. You have a basement, a standout basement that you never really use anymore. Well, it's 1,000 square feet, or let's call it's 2,000 square feet. You have a 2-story house, you get a basement, not really living space, not really used. You could turn that basement into a junior ADU, 500 square feet, and an interior conversion ADU or interior ADU, as long as it's less than 800 square feet. 800 square feet is an important number from a regulatory perspective. If it doesn't add to square footage of your house, not in addition, if it's not detached, and if it's under 800 square feet, you can do that one in addition to a regular detached ADU and a junior ADU. The secret with ADU rules and the reasons why I do what I do and speak at things like this is because the basic rules are relatively simple. But when you start talking about individual projects and individual, like Marin County has a slightly different rule set, Cloverdale has a slightly different rule set, then you start getting into lots of interesting details where the specific property, the specific goals of the homeowner, and the specific rule set really start to play. In general, and you'll hear me, I don't say that lightly. In general, if you're under 800 square feet for your main ADU, like the smaller than 800 square feet ADUs have a lot more state protection from where they can be and how they can be. They're called state exempt. You don't have to remember that. Once you get over 800 square feet, local rules tend to apply more often. But Marin County has this ability to do these 2 smaller ADUs. And every year for all the jurisdictions, as these new laws come out, they update their ordinances. So what's true in 2025 may not be true a year from now as the ordinances update. Let's see. Yes. Okay. So if they're down, so she has a property from 1955, has sort of a second unit built long ago with kitchen. and space downstairs to build something as well, correct? So without looking at your property, so that's a big caveat, but without looking at your property, it reads to me like, yes, you could do a detached unit in your backyard because the current ADU doesn't, it's not, it's, yeah. So you, yeah. So you could theoretically have a detached, sorry, just saying she doesn't want to do detached. So you could do detached, and in the basement, you could do another unit and you should be fine. And it could be a junior if it's 500 square feet or less, or it could be a regular ADU and it could be bigger than 500 square feet. If you have, she asked if you could have a junior and two ADUs. The pre-existing one, I don't think counts as an ADU. It's not, it wasn't registered as an ADU. It should, yeah. Contact us. We can talk through your options. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Other questions? So you see, I can go down the rabbit hole of these things because I can't stop thinking about what's possible here. Yeah. Does state rent control apply? That's a really good question. I don't believe that it does. That's actually one of the questions I have for, so on October 15th, we're doing a joint webinar with Fair Housing of Northern California. And those are, when I contacted them, I said, I don't know the rent side of the stuff very well. Can you help me out? So I would recommend either watching that or signing up for the webinar and we can cover that question there. Any restrictions on two full? Table collapse. I don't think anybody was hurt. Okay. So she has to have two full ADUs. Depends on your jurisdiction. And by full ADUs, I'm limiting them to 800 square feet or less. In the county, possibly. Cloverdale, yes, I think so. But most of the places, no. Sir, I know you've been waiting for a long time. So on a remodel, if it's more than 50%, that triggers updating the whole house to current building codes, including sprinklers. Sprinklers are very expensive. Great question. Yes, it does that. So when we talk about ADU rules, 99% of the rules we're talking about are on the planning side of the equation, not building code, right? There aren't really much in the building code yet dealing with ADUs. So if it happens in the building code, with very few exceptions, that's going to happen to an ADU. So if you're doing an internal conversion, you got a house built in 1955, you're going to convert half of it or 52% of it to an ADU, that's going to trigger a ton of very expensive updates to the whole property. Now with fire sprinklers, and I want to bring this up because this under state law, I always feel weird arguing against fire sprinklers, but under state law, if your main house does not have fire sprinklers, the construction of an ADU will not trigger the requirement for fire sprinklers. There is some fire departments did not realize that was the case because normally you build a new house, you have to put in fire sprinklers, but state law has a carve out for ADUs. And I always recommend, for those of you who've been to the consultation, you know what I'm about to say next. When you're planning your ADU, you want to talk to the planning department, you want to talk to the building department, you want to talk to public works, and you want to talk to fire. You want to say, I want to do this thing. Is this going to trigger sprinklers? Is this going to trigger, a second water connection to my property? Early on, before you're in design, because you want to try and set that level of how complicated, how expensive can this project get? And those early conversations are going to help you and, the department that you're talking to, they're not binding. They don't have a project before them they're trying to approve. So it's not guaranteed, but at least it kind of sets the tone of, this is something I need to watch out for. I don't want to, I'm getting close to 51% of my square footage. I really don't want to get over that marker because that's going to make this project twice as expensive. Okay. Yes. Yeah, those were all the key ones. I have a whole bunch of really technical ones, which I realized this morning, like I probably shouldn't go deep on the what's a state exempt ADU versus what's is not, but I'm happy to talk to anybody about this stuff at great length. So feel free to contact me or come out and see me or email me. I will talk your ear off about this stuff. And I think we're kind of going to wrap it up because we're going to do the roundtable with the 4 presenters. And I'll take, I guess, maybe a 5-minute. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I think it's turned off. I've got cards at the white table in the hallway, ADU Center, Scott at aduscenter.org. Scott at aduscenter.org is the easiest way to get a hold of me. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your great questions. I hope you found this useful.
Anyone who's on the Zoom or anyone here that didn't get questions answered and needs to leave, if you email your questions to publiccomment@cortemadera.gov, we can address those during the panel time because I saw some hands raised for the folks that were online and some of you guys may be taking off. So thanks.
Record progress.
So those of you who are waiting for the roundtable discussion, we discovered that everyone who's going to be in the roundtable discussion is swamped at their tables. You can't hear me. Okay. So we're going to have a much smaller roundtable discussion between Ryan and myself and just take any of your questions that we can. The other 2 members are swamped at their tables talking to people about their ADU project. So we don't want to pull them away while there's some limited time left. So if anybody has questions or wants us to expound on things ADU, let us know, Ryan. Okay.
UDU versus just a renovation.
Okay. So question is, she has a downstairs with a bath. She has room to put an exterior door and a pathway to it. How to make the decision whether she wants it to be an ADU or just a renovation. Do you think it's more than 500 square feet? The downstairs? Okay. You have lots of options here. I would say, so you could have renovation, you could have a junior ADU, you could have a regular ADU there. If you wanted to rent it out, then I would probably go for a regular ADU in that case. If you don't ever plan on moving away, or if you plan that you might want to move away. Right.
I'm in the same realm as you. It's like, what do you want to do with it?
Yeah.
What are you trying to get out of life? Mm-hmm. Renovation.
Yeah.
Is the independence really important? Like the privacy? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is actually a really important question, and one we see variations on 1,000 times is that, family's going to come back or move in. How separate do you want them to be? How much do you want to plan for the future? And what are your ultimate goals over time? As Ryan just asked, depending on the total size of the house, if you take away the bottom square footage, you reduce the square footage of the existing house, you will impact its value. Exactly how? Tough to say. Adding the ADU to your property will add value. Will it balance out? Impossible to say with the information that we know, but it's something to think about. If your daughter's going to move back, maybe you just build a small second kitchenette down there and just get the permit for a small second kitchenette and leave it at that. And maybe you lock the door between the two places and you guys can just act like they are separate places. That's probably the least expensive way to go from a permit cost. And Carrie, jump in please on this. I think your ADU permits are likely to be more expensive than a remodel permit, but I think they're both based on cost. With an ADU, you would need to do, there's the chance that you have to do more utility upgrades. You know, a second, if it's going to have a second address, it's probably a second PG&E meter, which is significant money. Depending on your water supply, you may need to upgrade that because it will now be, you know, so if it's just for your daughter for this next period of time, I would do a remodel.
Yeah, I would say that the remodel, the ADU laws are really beneficial where you're over your lot coverage, you want to put something in the backyard within your setbacks, or you want to do something where you need a special exception, then the ADU laws would help you do that without needing special exceptions. If you're doing something within the footprint of your main house and you want to just do it as a renovation, I do think that would be your path of least resistance.
And just to universalize it, like this is what everybody does. And so thank you for being a wonderful example. It's as soon as you started thinking about your options, even though what you're trying to do immediately is create living accommodations with privacy for family, you immediately go to like, but I also want the house to be worth as much as possible in the future. And if we kept talking, you'd be like, I also want. And of course I want that too, but we got to be ruthless about being super linear. Like my number one priority is to achieve this goal in the most efficient way possible. And if I can get number two, like points, yeah. Number three, like it guides me, but I can't do everything at once on the property. Like there's always trade-offs. And every kind of decision in this murky world and labyrinth of permits and fees and unexpected surprises because of supply chain disruptions caused by a global pandemic, right? Like we're gonna have your protocol by which you make these hard decisions because you already know your number one priority is I'm gonna create a safe place with a lot of privacy, super livable for me and my family member, or whatever your other, you know, I talked to a lot of people and it's cash flow. It's talked to other people and it's future value of the property. Yeah, of course. If you can speak into the mic, because that makes it easier for the Zoomers.
I probably have several questions, but I'm going to start with one of them. And that is, are there any things that we should think about that we don't already aren't already thinking about property taxes and inheritance things when it comes to ADUs, JADUs, any of these things that we're talking about?
There we go. Hi. Inheritance, I can't think of anything in terms of property tax. I got that question a lot today. You know, you're not assessed on the new value of the property. You're going to be assessed on the improvements that you've made. So that can be, you know, concerning for most, thinking, you know, you're going to be taxed on the entire new valuation, and that's not true.
You can also call the assessor's office and tell them what you're doing, and they can give you the formula they're using to assess like what your taxes will be. A lot of people go in with a assessed value lower than the actual value to try to keep their assessment down. A lot of municipalities have gotten smart and have just come up with a formula that they apply. So it's good to call them and see if they have a formula on how they're going to assess the taxes, just for planning.
Not financial advice, but talk to an estate planner who knows ADUs, because a lot of the tricks that work in general work with ADUs too. So like putting the property in a trust and then spending your money on constructing new value on that property, even though it already belongs to the trust, which is already in the hands of the next generation or whatever. Like all the all those things still work. And ADUs are expensive, so they are a way to structure finances cleverly, but way over my head.
I think also to jump on that, we have a lot of clients that go to estate planners because they have more than one child. So maybe they're building the ADU for one child to come home, but then there's another child in the picture. Then there's a question of, is like the child that'll be on property also caregiving, and where's the equity? So you do want to do some advanced planning on that just to avoid problems down the line. And if, you know, what you want to do with the property long term. So we have a lot of, because we do a lot of multi-generational, that does come up quite a bit. So you should kind of at least have the conversation and talk out a plan.
Somebody asked.
I just have a question about height restrictions on ADUs built on top of pre-existing structures like garages.
It varies dramatically by municipality, but one thing to know is that if you have an existing garage, a lot of times the garages are maybe 0 lot line or 1 to 2, 3 feet, like in an area where the ADU couldn't be built. If you build an ADU on top, if that's allowed and you have the height limit, the ADU must uphold the 4-foot setback for ADUs. So let's say you have a 0 lot line garage, it's built right on the property line, the ADU would have to step in. We have to, like, several municipalities around here allow ADUs over garages, but I would have to double check each. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure every time you read the building code and planning code. So we need to double check it for you. And there are some new allowances, like if you're in a more, like if you're on a primary street and there's more transit around, then there's some incentives that you can go taller if you're near like a major bus stop or other areas.
Many building departments do also now have counter hours, which is really nice. I always say, if you're not sure, just go in and talk hypothetically with your building department and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. They're not going to come and inspect, or, you know, they're happy to answer questions.
And also double check though the state, like start with your building department, but the ADU laws are moving at an incredibly rapid pace, and not like everybody's busy at the building departments. They may not know the latest changes to the ADU code. So HCD is the Housing and Community Development at the state that oversees ADUs. They have a handbook. They also have a great website where you can put up a question and they'll get back to you. They're being really good about it lately in 24 to 72 hours. So if you do run into a weird no at the planning department or building department, you think maybe that's not right, you can put it in a question to HCD and they'll help you with interpretation.
Yes, hi. Carrie, I wanted to ask you, I saw your presentation earlier, and with your considerable experience in designing and having built projects, just stepping back, are there things that you try to convince ADU builders, the actual customer, the homeowner, to do in the design that they just don't do, things that they forget? Do they have I guess my question is, they have a finished project and they look back, they say, gosh, I really wish I made it taller. I wish I had another bedroom. I wish I had bigger windows, anything like that that you've seen?
I mean, I really try to get people to put in, I'm a big advocate of doing slab on grade, trying to have one entrance that's without steps. I'm a big proponent of putting in curbless showers. Like a 4-inch step isn't a barrier until it is. And then it's like, you know, like climbing Mount Everest. So I'm a big believer in putting in a lot of smart universal design and age in place features ahead of time, because when you do them from scratch with a new detached ADU, they don't really cost that much more. If you needed to go retrofit something later, you might not be able to do it, or it would be exorbitant to retrofit. So I hate to see when people skimp on those things because they're very expensive to put things back. My mom the other day was just saying, you know, we could have saved money on this ADU if you didn't put all the skylights in. And I said, Mom, how many lights are on right now? She was like, none. Like, well, okay. So I think lots of daylight, really looking at daylight. And then really, I think people do think they're going to just move in and all of a sudden their habits are going to change and they won't have things and they don't need storage. And so I think that's pretty foolish to try to design to like live in some way you've never lived before. Like, just, you want to bring your sewing machine. What are the dimensions? Where are you going to, you really do have to think about where you're going to put everything. And then I really invite people to think about who you're designing the ADU for right now, and think about who it might be for in 5 years, because we're seeing like the one we designed in 2008 is on its third occupant. It's a completely different profile than who moved in the first time. So they're really neat in that they flex with your family and what your family might need, but you do want to kind of at least walk through the scenarios of what if this was a renter? What if this was a local teacher? What if this was your child or your parent? And that helps you make different decisions about orientation, size, storage, or what if it's for you?
Hi, I'm an architect and I'm interested in helping small groups of people develop independent, intentional community.
Woohoo!
And so one of the things I've been very interested in for several years now, I don't know the name of the law, but it's the one that provided for people to split a single family residence and put 2 units on each half. And then someone just told me, if you're on a corner, you can do 6 units. Do you folks have any resources that you can recommend for this?
So in general, this is my favorite kind of question because like ADUs were the first thing that really popped off, but like it's just another way to build a house, right? Or permit a house. And there's so many things happening right now. So now there's like 10 up to 10 small lot subdivisions that let you do, and most of the lots realistically do look more like a 6 because you want to keep the context of the neighborhood and blah blah blah. Or you get to 10 because it's a very large lot. Those are rare. But then the law, technically, like the statutes, allow you to do up to 10, not counting the ADUs. So if the property should have more housing on it, there are more and more things that will allow you to do incredible development projects that can include the ADUs. Then it becomes much more a game of, okay, now that I'm allowed to do whatever I want with my property, what should I do? How do I pay for it? How do I plan for all of it in the smartest way possible for the future? And like with great power comes great mistakes. So don't do 10 before you've done 1 is kind of good advice. But you're designing these smart communities, intentional communities. Like there's so many cool models. I would just spend as much time going around and networking off of stuff like this, like Rolf's project for people graduating from foster youth into a tiny home community where the tiny homes are cheap because there's no wet stuff, and then they share a kitchen bathroom facility. That's an incredible way to do something. You got Cole moved into that thing up in Portland where it's like one of the original cool Portland communes where everybody's shared responsibilities of gardening and IT and stuff. Like there's so many cool models, and you learn so much more by talking to the people who've just penciled one out and actually built it than I can't answer the real questions. No, I don't.
Gosh, you would think there's got to be one. There's a neat guy that blogs about it a lot called Live Near Friends. He's in Alameda. But that one's really interesting to follow. I would recommend you file. Ryan has a how-to ADU on Facebook, and I'll promote him. He's really great at keeping up with all the state laws. I think I mentioned early YIMBY.org and the Casita Coalition. I haven't brought up yet today. Casita Coalition and YIMBY are both nonprofits, and they're helping. Casita Coalition is I guess they both are advocating a ton for more housing laws. Just because this is going to be recorded and you can listen later. SB 9 was the original one where you can subdivide a lot, add a new primary house, and put ADUs on both. There's now SB 684.
I got a spreadsheet.
1121, or no, wait, SB 1121. It was, and then
AB
1033,
1033,
12,
SB 1211.
It's a young ladies game. I lost my memory 2 years into this business. I don't know what you guys are doing. there's a
Making up numbers.
spreadsheet. It'll be online, but like there's crazy opportunities.
Thank you. We did get a feasibility assessment for our property. It is a fairly big lot, several acres. So we know like how are the maximum size ADU, but we're kind of like, so now what? Like, how do we, with the particular lot that we have, which has a lot of slope, who can tell us where's the best place and how much it might cost to make the right, like you could put it here and that would be easier, but this is more where you want to be, but it's going to be more like, who tells us that? Who does that?
Help. What's the one thing you would want to accomplish the most with whatever project you embark on? Kind of same question. Are you creating value? Are you renting it? Are you living there? Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a helpful first step because then you start going to people like Carrie, honestly, who can think about, okay, if that's you have a vision, like how do we get there? And then what are the practical cost implications? Whereas if you had told me, I want to make some money because it's like a big lot and I'm underutilizing it, like, okay, I have different people who know how to look at a piece of land like a developer looks at it. And it just, there's everything in between. There's a million ways to answer. So whoever you are, you got to find that expert. Given that your answer is what it is.
I would start with an architect so that you can look at the pros and cons of it. And like our company does a complimentary call. And we have some neat programs where we can pop in different size ADUs and kind of look at the slope of the lot. And then we have some budget worksheets we've worked up to try to help people make the decision. And I don't do those because I'm too optimistic and it's not good to be optimistic at that point. You should be pessimistic at that point and then, be happy you save money later. But an architect should be a good first start. Or an experienced builder. The problem is that the builder will really help you understand the site and the infrastructure costs, but you still have to figure out what you want from a design perspective. So I do think starting with an architecture team would be a good person. And then most people will come out and do a site visibility where you could really walk it and talk it, but it's really, we can do so much on the computer. We learned during COVID that like we can see a lot more on the computer than walking the site, and we can help you visualize what you can see too. So that usually is the best first step. And most people should offer that complimentary. It shouldn't be a fee for that.
Hey, patience is a virtue.
My question probably is mostly for Carrie, but you were talking about, I can't remember what the term was you used for accessibility features.
Universal design. Yeah.
Universal design. Do some of your ADUs include elevators? In hillside properties in Marin, many of the properties in Marin County that are being looked at now are probably hillside properties,
Right.
probably have expensive foundations, but maybe I don't need. So what about an elevator?
Elevators are totally great. I mean, there's some smart ways you can plan where, like, let's say you don't want the elevator now, but you want to plan the renovation for it. Like one big thing is to stack closets above each other. So you can use it for storage in the short term, but you design the size. So it's kind of a weird shaped closet, honestly, because it's deeper than it needs to be. But if you're not ready to put in the elevator now, one of the big things with all of these things is think about master planning, like, because you can spend like a couple $1,000s to do some master planning. Like I call them combo meals, but we have a lot of clients that start with the ADU, but then they want to renovate their house, or they want to renovate the house one day. They want to make sure they don't put the ADU in a spot where they can't renovate the house or expand it. So it is good to think about the big picture. So for elevators, totally valid. There's some neat residential elevators that are not super big and not super unattractive. I think they're about $30,000 or $40,000 probably when it comes down to put it in. Lindsay, is that second? So you can design like if you're going to renovate, but you're not ready for the elevator, you can design a shaft that would support the elevator, probably run an electrical circuit at the time if you're doing it, so you can support it from a power standpoint. And then you could put it in later if you need to. But there are some good products on there, and it's a good way to go if you're on a hillside.
I think adding things for universal design are going to be tremendously coveted. Just to be able to age in place and thinking about that long-term usage of the home. There's a lot of people that want elevators and not a lot of elevators, and it can make a big difference. So it can increase your property's value as well as just increase the potential tenants. If you are going to have a tenant, that could be a really unique feature for somebody that's willing to pay for something like that.
Elevators are underappreciated right now. Like they're like a really good trick that I would expect to see in like 15, 20% of the ADUs that are with 2 stories, and I just don't see them. I saw a really hot one in Seattle where it was an exterior shaft, one of the 40 grand ones. And because it was in the setback, so this is all tricky, right? The city allowed it in the setback, which isn't always a given. It's an external structure, unconditioned, so it doesn't count toward the ADU square footage. And suddenly you're giving full access without an interior staircase, which eats up a bunch of space on your first floor and your second floor. So this person spent 40 grand, reclaimed like 200 square feet of the two floors, and like it's all in the setback where they wouldn't have been allowed to build anyway. So as long as it's allowed, right? And like it's allowed because there's a fire guy in the back. I gotta say, okay, you gotta make sure it's safe, right? It's gonna have to pass a lot of extra things for those three tricks to stack up. But when you work with somebody who knows what they're doing, they can like choo, choo, choo.
But also keep in mind, an elevator is not a means of egress. So like in an emergency, you can't use an elevator. So you may still need a stair. Yeah.
Yeah, it's curious when you talk about what your end goal is, which you can do that with relationships and property and making money. I kind of nosy, so I went into an apartment building near where I work in the Mission. In the Mission, people rent bedrooms. They don't. You have multiple families, and I went into this one renovation. It was really curious. It was being remodeled beautifully. The whole idea was to have many people living in there. It was legal. So they have like a big kitchen, like sort of a community room, living room. And then they have four or five bedrooms. So this idea of people renting their own apartments is no longer a reality, not in San Francisco. People rent rooms and, they go for like $1,200 or $1,500, a month in the Mission.
Yeah, creating the term is like co-housing
Right.
rather than communal housing. And, that is absolutely something to consider is creating more. Yeah. And what we really need, frankly, is more developers creating more co-housing communities. 'Cause I think we're all really lacking that in shared kitchens and
Yeah. It's it's super common that my advice at the end on an urban situation, especially, I'm like, why are you not just renting out a room? Like, why are you killing yourself to qualify as a junior ADU and taking on deed restrictions? You're just looking for a roommate. Like, if the privacy is important, then there's some other consideration there. But if you're just trying to create rooms, like bring back SROs, man. Like, let's do it. So there's a million ways. There's actually a really sneaky law that passed a couple of years ago. I think it was AB 916, but it was like you could convert any part of your house into a room. And it was like this long of a bill. And I was like, we should use this one a little bit more. I just haven't met the right people who want to fight that fight. But it pretty much says you can convert a garage into a room. You can convert a leasing office into a room. You can convert anything into a room. Shucks, it is.
A jargon suggestion. We call these examples co-living because co-housing is a much more specific kind of organization. Yeah, I'm really excited about today. I learned that it's possible, according to the state, to do condoization.
Only when the city opts into it. But my prediction is that in a couple of years, the state will just say, that's the one.
yeah,
Or you
more and
could even
more
tell people that too.
townships are opting into that. To AB 1033, more and more cities have been opting in. I know like Sacramento, Berkeley, San Jose,
Santa Cruz, San Diego, West Hollywood, Santa Monica.
and San Francisco. Yeah. So I think it's slow. It's happening. And I think ultimately we'll see that across the board because people I know in almost every area are asking about that and are interested. And there's people here in Marin that, they want to build their ADU and then sell it off to a family member. And then you create a tiny little HOA between the main home and the new ADU. It's a great way to create more housing. And then that person could then potentially now be a new homeowner, but they've purchased a home that's a lot less expensive than it would be a single family.
For context, we're talking about condos, but it's not what you think with a condo building. It's just a financial structure and like a property ownership structure that lets you think about the property completely differently. You could take money out of every part of the property once it's condoized, but never talk about condos when you're talking to politicians. If you're asking for it in your city, it's starter homes. How do you do it? Well, we adopt AB 1033 locally. What's that mean? It happens to be through condoization and HOAs and da 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 da. Da, but like, we're building starter homes. Hey, it's not my line. That's the Casita Coalition. If you're a professional, it's an institution that's really worth joining. If you're an activist, YIMBY Action. Casita Coalition. It's the one Carrie talked about. So they're good for practitioners, especially. They have a class that's good for homeowners too. And then YIMBY Action is great for activists. And if you care a lot about the state laws, which tends to be like little developers, your serial developers, California YIMBY.
And everybody knows there is a tour you can sign up for that starts at 1, right? So I don't know where
Yeah.
you have to drive, I think.
Yeah, they're all over the place. So there's like 14 units and you pick which ones you want to drive to. Yeah. It's really awesome if you're thinking about it. Like, well, one thing, books like this are amazing.
This new book. Awesome.
Right. So Lily was selling this book out in that room. Yeah. I mean, just go grab a copy from her.
Yeah, you can go buy one out in the lobby.
I think $35 and it's very, very pretty, like inspiration for what these can be. And they're all real ADUs. And then if you can't if you want the experience in real life, tour is always fun because these things fill up instantly. So it's really hard to organize these because, they're almost never vacant. And when you get to snoop around and see what 400 square feet feels like or 750 square feet feels like, it helps a lot. And you see things like that elevator, you're like, oh, or you see some clever cabinet solution and you're like, yes, I'm taking pictures.
Till 4, 1 to 4.
Anybody else? Okay, I'm gonna hang out with my sponsors, Realm, who help you find builders if you want to come ask me any questions. And y'all are going back to your tables before the tour too. So meet us out there. Thank you everybody for coming.